Proverbs. I don't know if it's necessarily stolen verbatim, but again, it could have been, and we just don't have the original text. But it is similar enough to some of the original texts from Egyptians and Babylonians that we go, this sounds remarkably similar. Could be, but I don't know for sure that it was lifted, but there are enough scholars who do, who think that it is. All right, so let's take a look. And again, the first line, probably written by the editor, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And now we get into the lines. Rosemary, if you take it away.
For learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of discernment, for acquiring the discipline for success, righteousness, justice, and equity. For endowing the simple with shrewdness, the young with knowledge and foresight. The wise man, hearing them, will gain more wisdom. The discerning man will learn to be adroit. For understanding proverb and epigram, the words of the wise and their riddles.
And that line, those lines, seem to almost be the introduction to everything that follows, right? Because it says, for understanding proverb, which is a mashal, which is again also parable, and the word here is melitza, which they translate as epigram. What does the King James say for epigram, proverb, and interpretation? Yeah, it's probably a better. Yeah, yes. Yeah, this is like the editorial opening to this. Explain what the purpose of this, right? The purpose of this is to gain wisdom, to learn, and for the young people to grow in knowledge from this collection. But again, the word mashal is right here. That's the word mishle. That's what we call the book, which again, like biblical poetry, and it's laid out in biblical style, you have the synonym. Understanding proverb and epigram, the words of the wise and their riddles, which is the word chidotam, which sounds like it's a puzzle, right? A riddle sounds like you're not supposed to really understand it. Like you got to be super smart to figure it out. We're going to try to trick you. It's not so much that as it is something that requires thought rather than a trick. Riddle almost sounds like, the Riddler from Batman. It's not meant to be messing with you. It's tough. It's a tough challenge is what I would call
More
it.
like a koan?
Yes. Where you got to think about it. Let's think about this. Let's spend some time on this. Divrei Chachamim literally means the words of the wise, the people who are wiser than you. So this is the introduction. So the first 6 lines kind of set up the introduction. And now we start getting into the lines. This one of those lines you'll see actually there was a billboard out in Santa Clarita on railroad for years that said this.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline.
Stop, just pause right there. It was only the first part, actually. It was only the first part of the clause, right? Which is Yirat Adonai Reshit Da'at. Though fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Yirat Adonai Reshit Da'at. Now, that was what was on the billboard. You'll see this sometimes on bumper stickers. It's an interesting line because it seems to imply that faith is necessary for wisdom. Now, we oftentimes will say they're not necessarily connected. As a matter of fact, some people would say science tells us we're not supposed to be having too much faith. The Jewish tradition, like many wisdom traditions, opens with this understanding. And again, I don't like to use the word fear for yirat. I like to use the word awe or amazement. But if you think about this idea, what you're left with is a I think, um, um, I think you're really left with an idea of understanding that we're part of something much bigger, and that let's begin by stating the obvious, which is that there's so much we don't know. And to me, fear of God is that humility to understand that we don't understand very much. We just see a fraction of what's out there. And so, you know, a lot of people could use this phrase as a, and again, I mean, I'll just show you the places that people, and it appears elsewhere in the book of Proverbs. Sometimes they quote this one, and sometimes they quote it in 9:10. I think one of the reasons why they don't like this one as much is because it has the second part of it. It has the other part, fools despise wisdom and discipline. A lot of Proverbs, by the way, and this is the good time to tell people, a lot of times in Proverbs, it'll tell you the other side too. As much as it tells you what the good thing is, it'll also tell you what the bad thing is. So wisdom is oftentimes juxtaposed with folly and being thoughtless and being violent and all the bad things. So the good thing is given and the bad thing is given right next to it. So you have that a lot. In verse 9, it has the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding, which people like a lot more because it doesn't have the bad part on it. But a lot of people just use the line by itself. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And these are just, again, these are different. I mean, you can, people put it on the poster, right? This is the poster. This is the poster that's in the church office. You don't see it a lot in synagogues, by the way. Interesting, right? It doesn't make its way in because, again, I'll just show you. I mean, you can see it on a bumper sticker. These are some of the bumper stickers, kind of the cars you'll see it on. But people like to translate it as fear, right? They like to use the word fear, where in reality, you could also, like I said, use the word reverence or awe or appreciation. Fear obviously has a connotation of being scared and being frightened.
Stickers are because they're bifurcating this statement.
Well, it is partly a fraud, but I would say it's a bigger issue, which is people want to focus on the fear part rather than what the actual, it's not fear of God because God's going to punish you. It's fear of God because we have humility, understanding that, like, in the face of God, we're tiny, right? We're minuscule. And however you understand that, like the totality of all understanding, which is God, we're a tiny little fragment. So that's, to me, what fear is. Fear of God is a sense of humility and a sense of appreciation and awe for how much there is to know and how much there is. And again, every experience.
I argue the second part of that sentence is more important than the first.
Well, John likes the second one because, again, and by the way, the word musar, which we're going to see a lot, chokhmah, we're going to hear a lot, right? That's wisdom. Da'at is knowledge, oftentimes translated as knowledge, but it's similar to chokhmah, but it's different. Sometimes people separate it. But then they also have this word musar, which they translated as discipline, which is not a bad translation, right? That's the King James, right? King James has discipline for musar. What do they have? Instruction. Well, yeah, I like that. I like King James again better. Musar with discipline seems like, again, like someone's, in my mind, discipline is somebody standing over you with a whip or a stick and going, well, this is the way it's going to be. But discipline seems a little bit harder. I think instruction is a little bit better in like the literal translation. we understand the word musar, by the way, in Hebrew and in Judaism a little bit differently. The study of Jewish behavior, of good behavior, is called musar. So there's a whole study in Judaism, which we've never really talked about. We've never done a class in musar. Some schools do. Some adult programs have a musar class. Musar is the idea that, and it really came out of the 1800s in Europe, Ashkenazi rabbis, the most famous being the Chofetz Chaim Rabbi Salanter, and some of the rabbis of Eastern Europe in the 1800s taught that the focus of Jewish understanding should be on behavior, on the way we act. That contradicted, by the way, the Hasidic Jews, who said it was about the way you pray and the way you love God, was considered to be a little bit alternative, right? Back in the day, the Hasidim were considered to be the more reformed Jews, in that they were the ones who talked about singing and dancing and praying and loving God, and the other Jews that were the main power brokers in Eastern Europe were the Haredi Jews, the real Orthodox Jews of Lithuania primarily, who taught that it's all about Torah study. It's not about anything other than Torah study. So the Hasidic Jews were fools because they were talking about singing and dancing and joy and all this other stuff, feel good stuff, new agey stuff. They didn't call it new agey then, but that's what we'd call it. And then the Musar kind of came out of the other direction, which was like, both of you guys are wrong. It's not about Torah study. It's not about joy and whatever. It's about the way you act. It's about your behavior. And so Musar started as a movement to focus on behavior, not discipline so much, but instructing people on behavior. Yeah.
That's different.
No, the prayers, the Musar collections are really writings from the rabbis who were advocating for it, and they still do. I mean, there's been a resurgence of Musar and even kind of a more modern progressive Musar in the Jewish world today, where people said, let's focus on behavior. Because again, some Jews in America focus on Jewish music. They'll focus on tikkun olam, social action. They'll think about politics. And then there really was, again, about 20, 30 years ago, some writers, Jewish American writers, who said, we should go back to the Musar movement of 100 years before, where people were really focusing on behavior and writing about how do we direct our behavior into ethical behavior and focus on that. So the Musar movement has had kind of a resurgence in this country. Yes, as Floyd just texted me, wisdom and goodness to the vile seem vile, from Lear. That is the version of this in Shakespeare. The understanding that wisdom is something we aspire to, and that discipline and that instruction helps us get to that, is something very important. And what we're going to see throughout Proverbs, and again, that line that we just read, again, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Again, to some people say, that goes at the beginning, because that's the letting it know. This is another important part, which interestingly in Lear and in other parts of classic writings throughout history, focus appropriately on this, which is, it is a generational aspect to this. And then you're going to see this in Proverbs throughout.
My son, heed the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the instruction of your mother. For they are a graceful wreath upon your head, a necklace about your throat. My son, if sinners entice you, do not yield. If they say, come with us, let us set an ambush to shed blood. Let us lie in wait for the innocent without cause. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, whole, like those who go down into the pit. We shall obtain every precious treasure. We shall fill our homes with loot. Throw in your lot with us. We shall all have a common purse. My son, do not set out with them. Keep your feet from their path, for their feet run to evil. They hurry to shed blood. In the eyes of every winged creature, the outspread net means nothing, but they lie in ambush for their own blood. They lie in wait for their own lives. Such is the fate of all who pursue unjust gain. It takes the life of its possessor.
And so what you see there is a great example of a text that sounds like a father speaking to his son. Which, by the way, we want to say at the very beginning, it said also listen to your mother. It didn't just say listen to your father. It said listen to your mother too. Which is, I think, is something very interesting that we're going to see in Proverbs, which is a very, very balanced understanding of the roles of men and women, at least at the time when this was written and when it was taught, or people collected it, however you want to say. By that point, the writers and the editors wanted you to know that women had a very important role. And why do I say this? Because I shared at Friday night services the tradition of the very end of Proverbs, which we'll get to several weeks. Proverbs chapter 31, better known as Woman of Valor. And we see that women in those days, and when again, those days meaning definitely over 2,000 years ago, women had a very important role to play in the home, and not just as a homemaker, not just as somebody who maintains the house and cooks and cleans and makes clothes and that kind of thing, but runs businesses and has roles to play in the community. So women definitely by this point have a very important role to play. And we're going to, of course, see, as I mentioned also Friday night, and I mentioned here in different times, the absolute I mean, you'll see what happens even today with the role of wisdom personified as a woman to such an extent that, again, to get back to some of what we talked about at the beginning, did this come from somewhere else? Because the personification of wisdom as a woman, we do find it in the Greek traditions. We do find it in Near Eastern traditions. It almost seems like she's a goddess on her own. I say that only because other people have said it. If you see it, just understand that you're not the first person to have seen this. And it leads us to a lot of the personifications, the feminine personifications that we have of things in Judaism, whether it's Torah, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's the Jewish people themselves. You'll start to see this in Proverbs. And again, right now, we've only seen chokhmah, wisdom, and it's a feminine word, but we haven't seen the personification of wisdom. But again, these little verses that we just had, this little parable, if you will, was don't go off with people who are trying to rob people for, take advantage of people to be a part of again, the peer pressure sometimes that comes with doing bad things.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that because, or touched on that because it seems to be a whole contradiction.
What?
10 to 19.
Yeah. What?
Heed the discipline of your father.
Yeah.
Do not forsake the instruction of your mother. Right?
Yep.
May the grace will reap upon your head and next time trouble. And then, my son, if the sinners entice you, do not yield. Okay, fine. Walk the other way.
Yep.
Instead, it says, now become a sinner.
No.
It does. It says, lie in wait.
No, it says those people who do that are bad. It's telling, it's a parable. It's saying that those people who do that stuff are bad. They're bad.
If they come with us, let us set an ambush.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see, what they're doing is they're putting the language, they set up, that's why it's not a one-line parable, a one-line anaclectic wisdom. It's a parable, it's a story, it's a little scene that you got to see the scene in your mind. The dad's telling the son or the whatever, the teacher's telling the guy, if some guys come to you and tell you, and then you see the scene play out, the guys are talking to you, hey, come on, let's take advantage of these people. Let's lay in wait and steal from them. And this amazing, this is the one line, right? The one line at the end is, right? Such is the fate for all who pursue unjust gain. It takes the life of the possessor. So if you do this, the irony is you take your own life. It's the destruction of your life if you do this. And it's so beautiful because that line is, again, the takeaway line, but you have to kind of like, you have to see the scene before it to understand. They just played it out for you. They just took the scene. So that's how you get to it. Now we're going to get to the first personification of wisdom. And here you have it.
Wisdom cries aloud in the streets, raises her voice in the squares. At the head of the busy streets, she calls. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she speaks out. How long will you simple ones love simplicity? You scoffers, be eager to scoff. You dullards, hate knowledge. You are indifferent to my rebuke. I will now speak my mind to you and let you know my thoughts. Since you refused me when I called and paid no heed when I extended my hand, you spurned all my advice and would not hear my rebuke. I will laugh at your calamity and mock when terror comes upon you. When terror comes like a disaster and calamity arrives like a whirlwind, when trouble and distress come upon you, then they shall call me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me, but not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose fear of the Lord. They refused my advice and disdained all my rebukes. They shall eat the fruit of their ways and have their fill of their own counsels. The tranquility of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of dullards will destroy them. But he who listens to me will dwell in safety, untroubled by the terror of misfortune.
Yeah. Now that whole scene, or that next section, seems not necessarily connected to the previous section. I mean, again, it could have been written by the same person, but it also could have not been written by the same person. That could have been another unit, which is why we sometimes call this a collection of collections. Now, some people say, again, Proverbs 1-9 is a collection. It seems pretty obvious because there's another line at the beginning of chapter 10 that says, hey, this is another collection of Proverbs. Okay, so that being said, but chapters 1-9 seem like a collection, and they seem like they've been pieced together and made into that they were a collection. So this second piece of chapter 1 is wisdom speaking, right? This is wisdom personified. And it begins with, again, wisdom cries out in the streets, raises her voice in the squares. At the head of the busy street, she calls. At the entrance of the gate, so that the introduction lines, the two introduction lines essentially are saying, wisdom is calling out to us. Wisdom is there for everyone, by the way, in the public square, which again, it says, again, it mentions the Lord, especially at the end. But for the most part, this doesn't necessarily feel like it has to be Jewish. But there's this understanding, again, that wisdom is telling people, you don't listen to me, you're going to pay the price. And that's the theme of this. And it's obviously towards the beginning of the book, and the beginning of this collection, in a very, look, this idea is not just here, by the way. It's not, this is chapter 1 is not the only place we're going to hear wisdom tell us, you better pay attention. You better listen to me, right? Because again, it's never just, here's what you need to do. It's also, if you don't do it, you're going to wind up, it's going to be a disaster. If you don't pay attention, if you don't do, what you need to do in order to increase your wisdom, you're going to have the bad stuff happen. So Proverbs isn't just like, hey, let's do the good stuff. Here's the good stuff. It's also, here's the bad stuff. And you can see this here. Actually, most of it is the bad stuff here. You know, the only really good line is to some extent is the end. He who listens to me will dwell in safety. But again, this is this idea that wisdom, and again, let's see what the note here says. Wisdom is personified as a woman, right? So,
You know, the last sentence would make even better sense. It said, untroubled by the terror of misinformation.
oh, that's good. Mifchad Ra, yeah. 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 Yes, Ra is definitely in this case bad, right? It's bad stuff. So untroubled by the Mifchad is probably not untroubled is not the good word. I guarantee you that's not what the King James says. What does the King James say? Trembling? Yeah. Fearful or trembling? Yeah, fear of evil. Mifchad. So they translate it as terror of misfortune. That's fine, but yes, the bad stuff is what's happening to you, as opposed to the betach, which is to be safe, to be dwelling. Yishkan means to, like from the word shekhinah, to be surrounded by safety. Yishkan betach. So listen to wisdom. Listen to wisdom. She's calling out to you. She's not hiding. She's calling out to you in the streets. She's everywhere. She's in the public sphere. You're just not paying attention to her. You're ignoring her in broad daylight. And that's the important thing here at the beginning. It's not hidden. Wisdom is not some esoteric knowledge that you have to search for. You don't have to go to a special school for it. She's crying out to you in the streets. And that's an amazing idea, which is that it's all there. You're just not paying attention to it. So that is the introduction. That is the way Proverbs begins. Let's continue, if you will, Rosemary, in chapter 2.
My son, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments, if you make your ear attentive to wisdom and your mind open to discernment, if you call to understanding and cry aloud to discernment, if you seek it as you do silver and search for it as for treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and attain knowledge of God. For the Lord grants wisdom, knowledge and discernment are by his decree. He reserves ability for the upright and is a shield for those who live blamelessly. Guarding the paths of justice, protecting the way of those loyal to him. You will then understand what is right, just, and equitable, every good course. For wisdom will enter your mind, and knowledge will delight you. Foresight will protect you, and discernment will guard you. It will save you from the way of evil men, from men who speak duplicity, who leave the paths of rectitude to follow the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and exult in the duplicity of evil men, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their course. It will save you from the forbidden woman, from the alien woman whose talk is smooth, who forsakes the companion of her youth and disregards the covenant of her God. Her house sinks down to death, and her course leads to the shades. All who go to her cannot return and find again the paths of life. So follow the way of the good, and keep to the paths of the just, for the upright will inhabit the earth, the blameless will remain in it. While the wicked will vanish from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it.
Yep. And so again, the line could just be for the upright will inhabit the earth, the blameless will remain in it. But it doesn't leave us with that. It ends with while the wicked will vanish from the land and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. So you don't just get, hey, and by the way, this is not the meek will inherit the earth, the upright will inhabit the earth. And the blameless will remain in it. It's a similar idea to what Jesus would later say, again, a version of that in the Sermon on the Mount. But there is a good thing here and the bad thing, which we have a lot in Proverbs, as we see. So chapter 22, again, is a man talking, or a person talking to their son, telling them what to do. And this one has more of the good stuff in it, right? Wisdom will enter your mind and knowledge will delight you. Foresight, this is all good stuff that's going to come. So this has got a lot more of the good stuff. But of course, it goes to the bad stuff. And what's interesting about this, of course, is the forbidden woman, which, see the note here, the strange woman, Isha Zara. Now, some people read this as literally a woman, right? Literally, this is going to save you from a bad woman who's going to lead you down a bad path. Now, that's possible. It is possible. It happens to people. It happens, as a father teaching a son what not to do. That might be one of the things you'd tell him. And again, if it was a daughter or a father teaching a daughter, telling her not to be with a bad guy who would lead her down past, you could say the same thing. This is definitely a feeling of a parent talking to a child, and you can reverse it. Now, but what about this alien woman? Is it really just an alien woman? Because, it's been pointed out that if wisdom is a woman, that what they're talking about here is not a woman per se, but the other ways, the strange ways of other people. So what it's really talking about here is not a woman leading you astray, but the other traditions that will lead you astray. And so people from the very early times were already interpreting this as a warning against heresy and against bad philosophies and bad traditions that might take you away from your tradition. Is there a note about that in your commentary there, John? About the forbidden woman?
Second danger is the wicked woman, the sexually predatory female, the strange woman. Warnings against the strange woman. She is in some ways contrasted with Dame Wisdom.
Yeah.
She provides the traits for the personification of folly. The strange woman has been interpreted in various ways, including 1, a symbol of folly and wicked counsels, 2, a figure for heresy in medieval Jewish interpretation and particularly Christianity, 3, foreign wisdom such as Greek
and Roman, yeah.
Philosophy,
Yeah.
and 4, a foreign love goddess.
Yes.
Aphrodite. It goes on if you want to.
So the commentary that John has is that this is a symbol, right? That she's a symbol for heresy. Yes, multiple ways. So it could be just a bad woman, but it could also be, again, these other traditions. So yes, in the Middle Ages, so that's a very honest interpretation, because there are people who don't feel comfortable recognizing that, yes, during the Middle Ages, as Jews were dealing with Christian persecutions and dealing with constant pressures for conversions to Christianity, that Jews saw this as a draw to the church, that the woman represented the church. Yes. The enticements were there because, of course, conversion led to acceptance by the greater society. You could be part of a guild, you could own property, you could have a title. And so this was considered to be, in the Middle Ages, a symbol of that, going to the dark side, if you will. But But again, when it was written, there was no church, right? There was no Christianity, but it could have been other traditions, and it could have been some of the female-based traditions like Aphrodite or Venus, some of the feminine goddesses, but it also could just flat out be other traditions, any kind of other tradition, especially in those days, which would have been more Greco-Roman traditions in a full picture, which could have included female deities, but it also could have been any kind of deities. It could have been Jupiter or, Zeus or any of those kinds of stuff, but the enticements of those kinds of things. So yes, we understood this from a very early period, even before the Middle Ages. We understood this as the foreign woman is not just a woman. It is not just a woman who is trying to lead us as a bad wife, if you will, which I guess is somewhat less chauvinistic in the sense that it's not putting the emphasis on like a woman in particular, especially again, when it's contrasted, as the commentary that John just read is, with Dame Wisdom, which is wisdom personified, Chokhmah, or as the Greeks would call her, Sophia, the wisdom personified, which is a female, almost a goddess, which is holy, like holy wisdom. As he said, Hagia Sophia, the great church in the Byzantine Empire, which was turned into a mosque, Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. And this persisted into throughout the Middle Ages, not just by Jews, but by Christians who would oftentimes, in less, I would say in more tolerant, somewhat less chauvinistic periods, the church would oftentimes allow for wisdom to be personified as a woman without it being a problem. Sometimes it was a problem if it was considered too feminine. It was sometimes a problem, and it was sometimes a problem again in Judaism if people saw this as a goddess. We are going to get to that issue, folks. I've hinted at it. You haven't seen it yet. If you think that I'm overstating the case, trust me, because we're about to get to the lines where she seems almost like a goddess. Okay, that's all I'm going to say until you see it, and then you make your own decisions. Let's go to chapter 3.
My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your mind retain my commandments, for they will bestow on you length of days, years of life, and well-being. Let fidelity and steadfastness not leave you. Bind them about your throat. Write them on the tablet of your mind, and you will find favor and approbation in the eyes of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding.
Now, these lines seem a little bit more like anaclectic wisdom, like, here's a line, here's a line, here's a line, here's a line. These seem a little bit more like that. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful, right? Bind them right, bind them around your throat. Let them be a tablet in your mind. Don't forget them. Another beautiful line right here.
In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths smooth. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. It will be a cure for your body, a tonic for your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the best of all your income, and your barns will be filled with grain. Your vats will burst with new wine.
Well, that's prosperity gospel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you can see we had it before, we've had it
We
for a long time. We've had
can't blame it all on later.
Nope. We seem to love that, right? We seem to really understand. You'll get it back. Don't worry about sharing your wealth with the Lord. You're going to get it back.
Do not reject the discipline of the Lord, my son. Do not abhor his rebuke. For whom the Lord loves, he rebukes, as a father the son whom he favors. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, the man who attains understanding. Her value in trade is better than silver, her yield greater than gold. She is more precious than rubies. All of your goods cannot equal her.
Yeah, and there we start to get those like things that we see in Proverbs, right? And especially again in Eshachayil, where we see, her values of rubies. Um, Wisdom is compared to something of value, and then later on, it's very clear that Eshachayil, that your wife is also a great woman, is like that. So it's interesting that Proverbs kind of begins with a testament to women. A woman is personified as wisdom, but then actually deals with a real woman, with your wife, which is clearly it's a wife, not just wisdom. So again, the value that is to wisdom, very important.
In her right hand is length of days, in her left, riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths peaceful. She is a tree of life to those who grasp her, and whoever holds on to her is happy.
So let's pause right there because Rosemary knows what that is.
Yes, that's
What's
Chaim.
interesting about these lines, where's Mike? Where'd Mike go? Mike asked, where's the prayer? Well, here's your prayer, Mike. What's interesting about the prayer here, beautiful lines from Proverbs. This is the most famous in our prayers, by the way. So that's why I want you around, because chapter 3, it's chapter 3, and here's where it is. What's interesting is the lines are reversed, 18 and 17. Normally in our prayers, we'll quote a line and it'll be in the order that it comes in the Bible. This actually reverses them. And the lines are line 18 to line 17.
That's Chaim.
Eitz Chaim hi lemachazikim ba v'tomchecha meusha. We open up the ark. Derachecha, to put it
Feel like you
away.
should stand up.
Darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Now, what's interesting is the last few lines, Ashiveinu Adonai. We haven't gotten to yet. It's from the book of Lamentations, which is the saddest book in the Bible, but it ends with these beautiful words, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuvai. Return us to God. Yeah. Yeah. No, wait. Yeah. So let's go through the questions, but let's just say that's a pretty famous part of the prayers. And it's a part of the prayers that we say when we close up the ark. The last time we see the Torah, we say, Eitz Chaim hi. She is a tree of life. Again, feminine, very clearly feminine. The he right there is she. Lemacha zikim ba, for all those who grasp it. Beautiful. But again, the lines are actually reversed. In the way they appear in the Bible, it's her ways are pleasant ways and all her paths are beautiful line, by the way, too. But it actually, we reversed it for the prayer. John, yeah.
So I see that in my notes,
Yes.
right? So I understand that now, but why these two, why, out of everything? Why is this recited
When we see the Torah. So
Tree of life meaning the Torah being the
yeah,
tree of life?
yeah. Now look, we have a tree of life right there that says Eitz Chaim right on it, right? So a tree of life for us is a metaphor that we use all over the place. Now, what's interesting is, of course, the tree of life that's in the Garden of Eden, it's called an Eitz Chaim. But it's not the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge is the tree of knowledge. Actually, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is actually, it's not just knowledge, it's the knowledge of good and evil. People leave that part out. They should say it's the tree of knowledge. It's not knowledge, folks. It's a knowledge of tree of the difference between of good and evil, which, by the way, is a different kind of knowledge. It's not knowledge of understanding necessarily of facts. It's a knowledge of what's right and what's wrong. In Judaism, these trees kind of sometimes conflate. So the tree of life also becomes, to some extent, the tree of knowledge. It becomes the tree, if you will. Even though there were two trees in the garden, this sometimes is kind of conflated as one tree, tree of knowledge and the tree of life. And the Torah becomes both of those things. The Torah is the tree of knowledge, and it's also the tree of life. We actually call the wood that the Torah is rolled on, we call those Eitz Chaim. We call the wood scrollers Eitz Chaim. We call those, then they got to be made out of wood. So we call those trees of life. We've always associated, right, the Bible with kind of the basis for knowledge. But by the time we get the prayer written, by the time the prayer is composed or the time that those lines would happen, these lines in the entire Bible are really the only places where it's called or where we find these words. Look at the full context of this, right? The full context of this is wisdom, right? It's happy is the man who finds wisdom. The line that kicks this in, happy is the man who finds wisdom, the man who attains understanding. Her value, right? Her value. This is clearly all about wisdom. What she is a tree of life to those who grasp her. They're talking about wisdom. Now, by the time we get to the Torah being the source of wisdom, right? Then we say, oh, well, the Torah is the tree of life, is the Eitz Chaim. And what's so beautiful about this is that rather than just saying we've already heard it. You acquire wisdom, you also acquire success. You'll acquire good behavior. You'll acquire stability and safety. All of those things come with wisdom. But what also comes with wisdom is happiness, pleasantness, peace, shalom. All of these things come with, and shalom doesn't just mean peace. It means balance. It means contentment. All of these things come with wisdom too. And so what the rabbis were able to do when they created, because it was the rabbis who created that prayer, or wove, they didn't create it, right? They wove it together. They wove the lines from Proverbs with the lines from Lamentations, which, by the way, this is from the book of the Bible, the Ketuvim, that are miscellaneous writings. This isn't from the Torah itself. These are from later writings, later collections, if you will. And the rabbis inserting those lines, and again, using those lines, are telling us, of course, the entire Bible is important because, look, these lines are from Proverbs. You're putting away the Torah, which is the first 5 books, and we're asserting at that moment, you and I know now, we know these are from the books of Proverbs. So when I'm using the Torah, the 5 books, I'm also asserting at the time, yes, but it's connected to the whole Bible, all the way through to Proverbs. So as I'm putting it away, I got Proverbs with me too. And so the rabbis partially, I would say, John, wanted to take a text from Proverbs and use a line from a later book of the Bible to say, hey, this is all our Bible. This is all connected. And I think what's so beautiful about it, though, which again, I don't know that they intended this, was they didn't focus at that moment about fear of God. They didn't focus on all those other things like, again, wealth and knowledge and just knowing stuff. They finished with happiness. And so every time I think about when I'm closing the ark and I'm saying this prayer and I'm hearing that prayer, I'm hearing the prayer, really listening, paying attention to the prayer, the fact that people who have this connection are going to be happy, that makes me happy. That makes me smile. It's not scary. It's not frightening. It's not fear. It's not like, oh, I got to be in fear of God. And it's not like, oh, I know Torah, and so look at me. Look at all the Torah I know. I know Torah because it makes me happy. I can smile. It's pleasant. It's nice. It makes me feel good. It's like a nice breath of fresh air. However you want to translate Darchei Noam, the path, the way is a pleasant way. It's a way that isn't, you're not getting messed up.
Which makes me wise, which the consequences makes me happy.
Yeah. But here, when you use this line as you're closing the ark, it's not even knowledge anymore. I mean, it is in the full context, right? I mean, the context right off the bat said, wisdom, who attains understanding. I mean, it's clear from the beginning what the full context is. But when it's taken out of context, and we remember again, when the rabbis consciously made us say, hey, look, it's happiness. At the end of the day, you can be knowledgeable, you can be wealthy, you can be smart, but what if you're not happy? And this is being happy. Pretty important. So the earliest prayer books we have are from the right after the Talmud period. The Talmud refers to prayers, and we know that there were prayers in the Talmudic period, and they are already composing the Amidah as we're reading in Brachot. They're writing these prayers. They're writing the Birkat Hamazon. They're writing these prayers. They're putting them together. But by the 700-800s, we have prayer books that we found that have these collections. We found versions of prayer books. Yeah. So we know that the prayers are very, very old, because if you think about it, the earliest Tanakh, the earliest Bibles we have, like the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, and these earliest books we have of the Bible, of the collected Bible, are really not any older. So the prayer books that we have, or the prayer, the versions of these prayers, the book, it's not like a book with a cover. They're pages or folio pages from prayers. They exist from roughly the same period. So the prayer books, if you will, are old. They're old compared to, again, other stuff that we have. Remember, the oldest texts we have of the Bible are not the Aleppo Codex. They're not those books. The oldest books we have are the Dead Sea Scrolls. The oldest ones we have are the Septuagint, the Greek copies that we have that are written on papyrus that we found that are very old. The Hebrew texts that we have come from the Middle Ages, and those are the earliest ones that we have. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are so much older. They're 600, 700, 800 years older than those books. So they're very, very important from that standpoint. All right, so that's the very famous lines that we have of look, I would argue, well, Eshet Chayil was pretty important too, the women of valor. But this is the most commonly used lines from Proverbs in Judaism, in Jewish tradition, by us. This is the one that we use the most, Eitz Chaim. This very simple but beautiful idea, that holding the Torah, holding on to it, by the way, grasping it, by the way. That's the word. It's not just like, it's not just looking at it. It's grasping it. It's holding on to it, right? To grasp onto her, holding on to it. With our strength, machazikim, right, is chazak, with our strength, It's not just like, I look at it, I put it over there, I hold on to it. So, I mean, there's action we have to do. You can't just say, it's just I know about it. You have to hold on to it. It means you have to do something. Now, more wisdom, but here we get.
The Lord founded the earth by wisdom. He established the heavens by understanding. By his knowledge, the depths burst apart and the skies distilled dew. My son, do not lose sight of them. Hold on to resourcefulness and foresight. They will give life to your spirit and grace to your throat. Then you will go your way safely and not injure your feet. When you lie down, you will be unafraid. You will lie down and your sleep will be sweet. You will not fear sudden terror or the disaster that comes upon the wicked. For the Lord will be your trust. He will keep your feet from being caught. Do not withhold good from one who deserves it when you have the power to do it for him. Do not say to your fellow, come back again, I'll give it to you tomorrow, when you have it with you. Do not devise harm against your fellow who lives trustfully with you. Do not quarrel with a man for no cause when he has done you no harm. Do not envy a lawless man or choose any of his ways. For the devious man is an abomination to the Lord, but he is intimate with the straightforward. The curse of the Lord is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the abode of the righteous. At scoffers, he scoffs, but to the lowly, he shows grace. The wise shall obtain honor, but dullards get disgrace as their portion.
So the last section of this, the last 20 or so lines are, those are lines that are, you can almost take out of context, they don't necessarily, there's a couple lines that maybe go together, but the next ones, don't necessarily, do not withhold good, right? That's not necessarily, connected to the next one. Do not, yeah, it does. It mentions them. And again, this is just general behavior, right? The way you treat people, the way you, the way you take care of people. If you have the power to do something, you do the right thing. But it's this line here I just want to take back a look at in verse 19 before we get again, we were talking about wisdom. And then the next line was, the Lord founded the earth by wisdom. He established the heavens by understanding. By his knowledge, the depths burst apart and the skies distilled dew. Look, there's a part of this text right here where it talks about wisdom being around at the very beginning. And that wisdom is around there as part of the foundation of the earth. The translation here definitely doesn't emphasize that because it doesn't use wisdom as a capital. There's no capital W there. And it definitely, again, kind of seems to be not necessarily the focal point of this, but John, does your note say anything about line 19?
No,
It does?
the highest praise of wisdom is that God himself possesses it, used it in creating the world and continues to use it, the welling up of springs and the descent of dew, original creation and ongoing providence.
Yeah. So the fact that wisdom pre-exists or was the blueprint, if you will, of the creation of everything is a very important idea in Jewish mysticism. It's part of kind of the Kabbalistic integrity of like everything, which is that wisdom is behind all creation. There's an order to it, there's a design, and that again, it's part of God's, it's woven into God's creation. It was at the beginning, it was there before, which is why we in Jewish mysticism, we have this idea that the Torah somehow predates, the Torah was there at the very beginning. Because if the Torah is wisdom and the wisdom was there at the beginning, then the Torah was there at the beginning. Right? So this is kind of the idea that the Torah is eternal and existed before everything. This is an important idea in Judaism, in mysticism, in Jewish mysticism, which is that the world essentially was created with the words of Torah. Like the words of Torah imbue everything. There's the Torah. The Torah are the notes that the whole world was created with, if you will. Like the music is the words are the letters of the Torah, and again, by extension, Hebrew letters and the letters of divine letters have a big lesson in lots of things, which is why you'll see Kabbalistic things with letters, and it's why Madonna has the Hebrew tattoo on her, and everybody in the Kabbalah Center would get assigned 3 Hebrew letters as their foundational letters. Weird kinds of ideas of the letters of the Torah meaning something on another plane. Folks, this goes back to here. It goes back to these kinds of lines that we see right here. And by this is where we start to say, hey, was this written with a Greek influence? Because the Greeks had these kinds of ideas, very much so, right? Rosemary, you know what I'm about to quote, don't you? I think you know.
Yes. So yeah, John, in the
This is
beginning.
the
the Word was
Gospel
with
of
God.
John.
Right.
For Christians, this is one version of their gospel.
Very, very, very Greek.
Very Greek and very famous, but was not seen as very Jewish, other than we start to see these ideas in the book of Proverbs. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and all that was life was all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, that's a very famous phrase, right? The word for the word is logos. Logos. And this is where you get these kinds of ideas in Greek, in the Greek effect on Christianity, where you have these kinds of ideas. So what we see in Proverbs is this intersection where we start to see the same kinds of stuff. This is not the only place we'll see it. This is the first time we've seen it in Proverbs, but we will see it elsewhere in Proverbs. So this is where we start to say, hey, was this Greek influence that was on this? Was there some Greek influence on this? Because it doesn't seem like it goes with some of the other stuff that we've seen. It's not completely different than Jewish ideas, but by a certain period, we start to see this influence on Judaism. And again, Kabbalah is definitely influenced by Greek philosophy, and specifically Gnosticism, which is something that started to have effect on Judaism 2,000 years ago during the Greek period, 2,300 years ago. We start to see this issue. And again, it is very different than other parts of maybe Jewish thought, and maybe even in Proverbs. Is wisdom something that's in the middle of the town screaming out to everybody, say, look at me? Or is wisdom something that is very hard to find and is only attained by people who can study it and understand it through tremendous study and understanding the story behind the story, which is esoteric, which is secret? So again, we have both kinds of things that emanate out of this idea, out of wisdom and out of the book of Proverbs. It goes in two directions. It goes into a very mystical, esoteric kinds of teachings where you're like, what did I just read? I don't understand. Like even that passage from John, I get it, but it seems like really, really like a heavy duty thing to lay down on somebody. And it's very different than, hey, everybody, this is accessible for everybody. Anyone can understand this. Can anyone really understand what John just said? Maybe, but it takes a lot of thought. It takes a little bit of putting it on our philosophic minds to understand that. All right, we're going to read a little bit more. We're going to read into chapter 4. I wasn't sure whether we get through 3 or 4 today, but we're going to read through chapter 4. And that means next week we'll finish up this first section of Proverbs. These sections, this first collection, if you will, which is, again, you'll start to see some differences in this, but at least you've seen some of the direction that Proverbs goes, the book of Proverbs. And as you can see, for those like in this room, Mary, and Mike, and John, we're all here for, it sounds like a very Christian group, Mary, Mike, and John. They were all here for Pirkei Avot, and they could tell you, and Mark's even worse. And you can see that these are not like Pirkei Avot. These are, there's some similarities, but not really. This is really a father talking to a son with longer texts, with kind of, again, more parable type texts.
You know, Rabbi, 21,
Yeah.
half of 22 are wonderful. I've said it to my kids without knowing it.
Hold on to resources and foresight. How did you tell your sons? What did you tell them? What was your version of that?
Common sense.
Okay.
And life is like a game of chess.
Yep. That's a good idea. This definitely is parents talking to children. Like this.
Sons, heed the discipline of a father. Listen and learn discernment. For I give you good instruction. Do not forsake my teaching. Once I was a son to my father, the tender darling of my mother. He instructed me and said to me, let your mind hold on to my words. Keep my commandments, and you will live. Acquire wisdom, acquire discernment. Do not forget, and do not swerve from my words. Do not forsake her, and she will guard you. Love her, and she will protect you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. With all your acquisitions, acquire discernment.
Yeah, now that's a little different than what we read before, right? The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. This is the beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. With all your acquisitions, acquire discernment, which is you actually have to go out and get wisdom. It's not like something necessarily that just comes to you. Some would also say you got to purchase it, you got to buy it, which is interesting because that's the word kine means when it says to acquire, that's the word we use for purchasing. You have to purchase it, right? And wisdom store, yes. And the next word, kinyanecha, which is your acquisitions. And then it says the word kine again. The word kine is used 3 times in that, different forms. That's the word acquire. We also see, oh, okay, yes, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a dollar amount for it, but it does mean that you actually have to go out and get it. You have to acquire it. It's not going to be handed to you.
You need to absorb it.
Okay, but you actually have to do something, right? It's not just gonna fly by you and you're going to catch it. You have to do something.
Sit and listen, but if you don't absorb what we're.
Yeah. Yes, you got to
I'm sorry,
acquire.
take
Got to absorb.
Don't take lessons from Mike.
Yes. It depends on where you're learning. That's right. But love her though. Love her and she will protect you. That's another beautiful idea, right? Do not forsake her. She will guard you. Love her and she will protect you. So yeah, that's an interesting relationship, right? Because the protection goes both ways. You know, you got to do something to her, right? You have to love her. Again, these are intergenerational. Son, this is what you got to know. I learned it from my parents. I'm telling you. I learned it and now I'm sharing it with you. This is intergenerational, right? That's a really important idea. And what's interesting about it, of course, is that we see these words here that are used a lot. Chokhmah and Bina. They're used synonymously, but they're also somewhat different, which is whenever you see the word Chokhmah, that's going to be translated as wisdom. Every time you see the word Bina, it'll be discernment. We also have, of course, this other word that's used occasionally, which we don't have as much, but we do have it right here, which they translated as, they didn't really translate it at all. I guarantee you the King James translated it. Verse 1. Mary, what does verse 1 say?
The instructions of a father and a pen to know understanding.
Yeah. They didn't translate, they translated it as learn. The word dot, which means to know or to have knowledge, sometimes it's translated as intelligence, but There's three words that we use for, and we've talked about this before. In Hebrew, we have three words that we use. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. Sometimes we juxtapose them in certain ways where you're not really sure that are they separate, but we do use them independently too. And again, they are Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. Not necessarily in that order, sometimes in that order. They are in that order in the acronym that you know very well as Chabad. Chabad is the word Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. Chokhmah, wisdom; Bina, discernment; and Da'at, understanding or intellect. It's interesting because as a Hasidic movement, as we said, Hasidism used to not focus on knowledge. It actually focused on joy and prayer and your attitude of love for God. But at a certain point, Hasidism, including Chabad Hasidism, started focusing on knowledge as well, and said, "Hey, we gotta focus on this stuff. We gotta focus on knowledge." So we have these terms in Proverbs all over the place, but in reality, again, they're very important in Kabbalistic teachings. You've seen the diagrams before of the Sfirot, which are the different emanations of God. You've seen this well, we've seen it in Sfat in Israel, but you see it in any place where they focus on Kabbalah. This is the map of the Sfirot. This is the map of the different emanations of God, the different ways that we can understand God through these different aspects of God. The Keter is the crown, is the top. But in the middle, kind of around the Keter, are the three that are attached to our mind. Here they are: Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. And then, of course, we have Chesed and Gvurah, we have Tiferet, Chod, and Netzach, Yesod, and Malchut. These are the 10 emanations, 10 Sfirot. But the ones that are connected to our brains are these: Bina, Chokhmah, and Da'at, or Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. So Chabad, from Kabbalistic teachings, took those three. But we start to see them again referred to in Proverbs as different aspects of knowledge. But what are they? I mean, how do we even translate them differently? Look, the different translations of the Bible we have will use different words sometimes when they should be at least consistent. But normally, when we say the word chokhmah, it's translated as wisdom. Bina will be discernment, and then da'at will usually be knowledge, or usually knowledge, because it's the way it's translated here. We use them again somewhat in the book of Proverbs. They're sometimes, again, they're used as synonyms, but they are different. And I don't know that it always helps as you read this, but let me just give you the difference. The way we understand it, at least now, it doesn't always hold true in Proverbs. Sometimes, again, it just seems like they're synonyms. Chokhmah, wisdom, is considered to be acquired knowledge that you get from living life and from being around people who are wise. You take in their wisdom. You take in the lessons that they've learned. It's experience, if you will, right? It's knowledge that's acquired over time. Bina, discernment, is usually understood as indifference in being different than wisdom. Bina is, when they're talking about discernment, they're talking about judgment. They're talking about your ability to make good choices. I know right from wrong. I know that if I do this, it's going to have a bad consequence. To some extent, it really is emotional intelligence. Again, knowing when to do something in the right situation. Discernment. And in da'at, intelligence is usually understood to be facts, factual knowledge, data, if you will. being able to acquire great amounts of knowledge. If they are different, they need to be balanced, which is why in the Sefirot, we have different emanations and we balance them. We can't just have one on one side and not the other side. We have to balance them. We have to, if you will, we have to include them all, right? We have to have the one on one side and one on the other, right? We have to have that. We have to have that, which is why when you look at, a tree, when they call it one of the trees, you have Chokhmah on one side and Bina on the other with Dad in the middle. You'll have balances of these emanations, so we don't just have one and not the other. We have a balance. It's a little bit tougher with these three because they all seem to be in balance. It's not just two. I'll give you a better example. The ones below it that has a right and left side, if you will, is Chesed and Gvura, right? Gvura is strength and Chesed is loving kindness. And the idea in this Kabbalistic, in these balance, is that you can't have only strength, right? You also have to have love. So if you're a parent and you're only going to show strength with a child, then they're going to be scared of you and they're going to not pay attention to you. If you show love to the child, then you also balance it out. So you can't just discipline a child and yell at the child. You also have to show loving kindness. So, I mean, that's a simple example, but there's other examples of that. And so when we think about how that manifests in our world, and we also, obviously, these are manifestations of God. So we say to God, we understand that you have strength, you have this immense power, but like at high holidays, we get in front of God and we say, we know you have all this strength. Please show us chesed. Please show us loving kindness. We know that the world needs to have your strength, but if it doesn't also have your loving kindness, then we're going to be destroyed because of our imperfections. So you have to have love for us, God. So this isn't just people. It's obviously God has to have these manifestations as well. They have to be in balance for God. So again, we're going to see these words in Proverbs. And just remember that, again, when we talk about Chokhmah, we're usually using the word wisdom, and then for Bina, we're using the word discernment. Okay, so there is a difference. Sometimes it's not very obvious. Sometimes it doesn't even, there's no reason even to mention it. But I mentioned it so you know the little bit of Hebrew, the little bit of stuff that's going on here, and you just know now when you see it what's happening. All right, let's continue, and we'll finish up with these last lines.
Hug her to you, and she will exalt you. She will bring you honor if you embrace her. She will adorn your head with a graceful wreath, crown you with a glorious diadem. My son, heed and take in my words, and you will have many years of life. I instruct you in the way of wisdom. I guide you in straight courses. You will walk without breaking stride. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold fast to discipline. Do not let go. Keep it. It is your life. Do not enter on the path of the wicked. Do not walk on the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not pass through it. Turn away from it. Pass it by. For they cannot sleep unless they have done evil. Unless they make someone fall, they are robbed of sleep. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of lawlessness. The path of the righteous is like a radiant sunlight, ever brightening until noon. The way of the wicked is all darkness. They do not know what will make them stumble. My son, listen to my speech. Incline your ear to my words. Do not lose sight of them. Keep them in your mind. They are life to him who finds them, healing for his whole body. More than all that you guard your mind, for it is the source of life. Put crooked speech away from you. Keep devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look forward, your gaze be straight ahead. Survey the course you take, and all your ways will prosper. Do not swerve to the right or the left. Keep your feet from evil.
And there's a line, John, that's even closer to what you said to your kids, right?
Paragraph 20 to 27 is one.
Survey the course you take and all your ways will prosper. Think again about where you're going, right? Think about the course you're taking, like figure it out. Is this the way that we need to go? So to have the foresight, to have the thought about where you're going. But again, to understand that for us, for Jews, for thousands of years, we have said, that this line, right? I mean, doing good, but also the fact that, if you take wisdom and make it the center of your life, again, if you think about it, is you're going to live. You're going to actually be able to have a life. And again, of course, you have all the stuff that's bad out there. It says, don't even, don't go through it. Don't take yourself through that way. You go, hey, I can walk through that way because I'm all good. I don't need to worry about going into a bad situation because I know what I'm doing. They say, no, don't even walk through that way. Stay away from that. Because again, the lure of it is so strong. And again, the problem is that people who are doing bad stuff, they want you to do it, and it gives them joy for you to do bad stuff with them, right? It says, unless they make someone fall, they're robbed of sleep. They need that. That's their life. And it's true. I mean, there's people who literally need to take taking other people down with them. Otherwise, they don't feel like they don't feel whole. That's so sad. So, think about that as Jews. Guard your mind, for it is the source of life. Guard your mind. Think about how amazing that is, Take care of your thoughts, take care of your mind. Again, to be thinking about the things that we do that affirm our knowledge and the way that we keep our minds strong. I mean, that's an amazing idea. Look, it doesn't have to just be translated as mind, by the way, because I have a feeling that's not the way the King James translates. How does it translate 23? Yeah. Yes. So they translate, okay, because the word lev in Hebrew, right, means the heart and the mind. They're not separate for us, right? We say b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meodecha. So when we translate the ve'ahavta, we say with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our spirit, right? But a lot of new translations use the words heart and mind because they know that lev in Hebrew doesn't just mean heart, in the sense that it's your heart being the center, not of your physical heart, but your emotional heart, right? The symbol of your emotions is your heart. That's clearly what we mean by that. But Judaism actually doesn't say that with the word lev. Lev means, and that's why the heart and mind needs to be there, because we understood lev as the center for your actions too. Now, in Judaism, we definitely don't want to think that we're acting with only our emotions, which is why the heart and mind both need to be there. Where in this translation, they didn't even care. They didn't even put the word heart. They just used the word your mind. So, I find it interesting. I mean, John, what does your translation say for 23? Guard your what?
Guard your mind, for it is the source of life.
Yeah. So look, we understand that the word lev is definitely closer to mind rather than than heart, because we would consider heart to be our emotional center rather than our intellectual center. And so if we say that we're working off of our heart, we're talking about more of what our passion is, what do we care about? What does our heart tell us is like, what do we love, right? What do we hate? where is our emotional direction? Whereas within Judaism, it's not as important. It's not that it's not important, but we understand it to be, well, you got to act with your mind. You have to use rational thought. So is the Lev a center for rational thought, or is it the center for passionate, passion? And so we definitely in Judaism would say Lev the intention of it must be more of a mind.
It has to be mind, because if you lose your mind, you lose your life.
Yes, well, some people would say your heart. But it's interesting about Judaism, which is that Judaism is always, at least in our history, is always focused more on the mind than the heart. Yeah. And so look, I don't want to dwell on this in the sense that I don't think it was intentional. I don't think the Christian translation was to intentionally translate it as heart, because the King James depended on the Hebrew for it. And in other parts, Lev does seem to be more of your heart. But it's clearly your intention. It's clearly using your mind. And Lev should never be only your heart, which is why the translations for it today, and like I said, most of the Ve'ahavta translations don't translate it as heart. They translate it as your mind, or heart/mind. Not really. Yeah. And the problem is that Lev is also your heart. It's also, you're physically your heart. Remember, the Hebrew words for these kinds of things are also, the word kabed, which means to honor, is also your liver. The word kibed is also the liver in a person. So the fact that there's physical places for these centers is not, you can't understate that. But by the way, did they understand that your mind, your brain was something different? It's difficult to know, because they didn't really refer to the brain as a brain. They didn't refer to it as the center. They never said your head. They never even said your head is your center of your knowledge. It's interesting that they kind of felt that the heart was the center of your knowledge rather than your brain. But maybe, again, it's because the heart was considered to be the place where you're closest to God. And that might be because they understood that at the end of the day, that's where life was. They didn't, but they knew enough to know that if your heart stopped, you were done. And they couldn't really regulate, or maybe monitor is a better word, the brain. Couldn't do, we couldn't do that until 50 years ago. Couldn't monitor a brain. However, they knew that your heart was the center of life. And they knew that that was like the place where God essentially was. That everything, you could lose everything else, but not your heart. And that was why I think really when it says bechol levavcha, right, with all of your heart, with all your soul, with all your nefesh, and with all your strength, is essentially saying with all your being. And that way it's laid out that all of your body and all of your intention and all your mind is devoted to God. Not so much the heart, because it's not really that you love God, which is kind of weird because it says ve'ahavta, to love God. But it's not that your heart is the center of love and therefore we love, because your nefesh isn't the center of love, that's your spirit. Your meodecha, your strength is, however you want to translate meod, your essence, your meodecha is not your center of love. So you're loving God with every fiber of your being. That's the way I translate it. And again, you can't translate all three words with the fiber of your being. So that's why they say with your heart, with your soul, and with your essence, or whatever, it's with your strength. But we would say today, if we're translated as ve'ahavta, and not as a prayer, but ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafsha b'chol meodecha, we could say with every fiber of your existence. Oh, not until. It's interesting. Mike, there's an interesting thing, which is the King James English existed before we had an English prayer book of Jewish prayers. The earliest English prayer books are not until the 1800s. And so Jews in England, let's say even, or before there's in the United States, not even the United States yet, Jews are starting to learn English. Why? Because Jews had been kicked out of England in the 1200s, right? They were forced out of the country. So how Jews prayed in England in 1100, we're not really sure. That's 1,000 years ago. But let's assume they were praying in Hebrew, not in English. By the way, the English of 1100 would have been, Chaucer English anyways. That would have been, whatever. You'd have been sitting there with that stuff. But forget that for a second. The earliest Hebrew prayer book, or Hebrew prayers translated into English would have been from the 1800s. And so when we get to that, the King James English already existed. So to some extent, the interesting thing is that did the rabbis, who were Orthodox rabbis, but were the Orthodox rabbis who were translating the prayers into English in the first English versions of those prayer books, did they rely on the King James English? Absolutely. They used the King James English for their prayers. So when they were taking a prayer like the Vehafta, they took it out of the King James, Bible. They didn't even attempt to translate it into their sensibilities. They just said, everyone knows the King James English. I'm not going to bother with any other translation. So when they're translating a passage from the Bible that's a prayer, it's a no-brainer. They're going to use King James. If they're going to use the Michamocha prayer from Exodus, they're going to just lift that out of the King James. They're not even going to bother translating it. And again, the King James Bible is a good Hebrew translation. It's a very, very, as I've told you many times, there's parts of it that I like better than the other English translations that we have today. They at least to some extent are trying to translate the literal Hebrew words. There's a very hard, they're really trying to stay onto the literal Hebrew. And the King James translation was made by Jews who had first made their way back to England secretly from Spain, who were living in England and probably forced to convert to Christianity too, but they were living there and they helped the scholars around King James to make that translation. And by the way, what was that translation all about? Asserting that the Church of England could teach and speak English in their prayers and have a Bible that they could actually say, hey, we're not part of Rome anymore. We don't pray in Latin. We don't read the Bible in Latin anymore. We read the Bible in English. It was a political 1500s, 1600s.
Translated it for me.
Yep. And so this was a major thing. And by the way, that was also a stick it to the Spanish because the Spanish had kicked them out.